The Sooners head to Ames and hand Iowa State their worst loss since 2019, but what does it really mean? We'll discuss that as well as look ahead to the Baylor game. You're listening to the Mainline Podcast. I'm Adam Jacquez, joined by co-host Tyler Burton, Corbin Polson. Guys, how are we feeling?
Good. 2 wins in a row. Let's keep this thing going. Like I said, really good weekend. Made the trip out to Denver for the weekend. So excited to be back up there in a couple more weeks. Being neighbors with Corbin.
Didn't even let me know. Didn't even let me know.
It was a spur of the moment. I got into town late Friday night, and then it was a quick turnaround. Got a lot of stuff done on Saturday and Sunday. Made the trip back to Oklahoma City on Sunday night around 10:30 p.m. But yeah, it was a good trip, guys. Adam, I hate to tell you this, but you're about to be the lone member of this podcast living in the state of Oklahoma. So it's going to be a 2-on-1 advantage in favor of the state of Colorado.
I'm not sure what that means, but good for you, I guess.
It is a huge advantage. Ty, did you do anything fun while you were out here? Just out of sheer curiosity, since I didn't know you were out here.
Went to a Halloween costume party on Saturday night. Dressed up as a member of the Average Joes, or about 15 of us, sporting the Average Joe's costume. So did that. Spent all day Sunday getting a few things moved into the new apartment. So Adam, we'll talk a little bit more off air about this, but yeah, excited about it. Oklahoma's 5-3, 2 games in a row, winning in the Big 12. So let's move on to Baylor,
guys. Before we hop into it, I know for people, we're recording on Tuesday. Any major takeaways from the initial college football playoff rankings? I was surprised Texas was ranked.
Were they? I had no idea. I paid zero attention to it because I just don't want to think about the playoffs, really. Yeah,
they are 24, yeah.
It makes no difference at this point right now. I mean, one, with Oklahoma not being in contention, I really don't care as much as I usually do, but I mean, they got it right, I think, for the most part, at least in the top 3, Tennessee being number 1, best resume, best win in college football. Can't deny that, but Josh Heupel is probably pissed off right now at the playoff committee chairman, putting them at number 1, 2 spots ahead of Georgia as they go to Athens this weekend. Kirby Smart's probably licking his chops, loving the fact that he can use that as a motivating factor for his team. But yeah, I don't really have any gripes about it. TCU being at 7.
It's weird.
We knew it was going to happen.
We did.
I can see
it's. We're a year to date from all of us looking at the playoff rankings live for the first week last year, and our jaws hitting the floor that an undefeated Oklahoma came in at 8 to start that off. So if OU's coming in at 8 undefeated, I don't think we should be that surprised that TCU's coming in at 7.
I don't know. It's just the justification that they try to give when placing teams in the positions that they are in. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's November 1st. We've got 5 more weeks of this thing to go. But I was hoping for that 1 versus 2 matchup this weekend in Athens, but 1 versus 3 is not bad at all. So we'll talk about that here once we get to betting picks. But Adam, you were the only one in attendance up in Ames at Jacquez Stadium over the weekend. How was the environment? How was the game?
Yeah, it was pretty good. They're set up a lot like Kansas State, if anyone's been to a game there. A fellow ag school, and it's just surrounded by parking lots, essentially, on most sides of the stadium there. So there's a really good tailgating. Yeah. There's a really good tailgating scene. I mean, OU would have that if there was just a parking nearby, and there really isn't. So they could do some things to help tailgating. We won't get into that. That was, that's a whole thing. But it's still a pretty good atmosphere. It's kind of weird because they're having a down year, but traditionally this is kind of what Iowa State is not that great of a team, but their fans were there. They were engaged. They got loud on 3rd down, but they kind of knew that this is just kind of a throwaway year. So it was still good. It's always interesting to go out and see other environments, and you do start appreciating a lot of things in Norman. Just the bigger scoreboards, the more info, the more interesting things happening during the timeouts, believe it or not. So there's just a lot of things that you start appreciating once you get outside of Norman, start realizing how most other college football fans live outside of, those really, really wealthy blue bloods. So definitely interesting, but overall kind of a snoozer of a game, really, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely a snoozer. I mean, it's not like what we've grown accustomed to with a lot of Big 12 offenses with the point production that we've seen over the past few years. But I mean, that's kind of to be expected. Iowa State's offense We talked about it in last week's episode. Hunter Decker's kind of being turnover prone, not really having any true playmakers outside of Xavier Hutchinson. But, guys, you go to Ames on Saturday, you get a win. You go +2 in the turnover margin. You dominate the running game on both sides of the football. Oklahoma outrushed Iowa State 182-66. Made some big plays on special teams. I believe Zach Schmidt, the OU kicker, outscored Iowa State's team by himself. So with we knew that Oklahoma special teams, with Venables being back, with Lincoln Riley being gone now, we knew that there was going to be an emphasis put on special teams, that being playing a bigger factor in the game. And like you said, you score a special teams touchdown, the fake field goal. Schmidt goes perfect 2 for 2. And then obviously Michael Turk, with 2 punts over 60 yards. So that's a huge weapon that Oklahoma has at its disposal, especially when it comes to playing the field position battle.
Yeah, that was key. The special teams was as good as Marvin Mims was bad. I think that's an accurate statement. Guys, are we concerned about the yips for the rest of the season from Marvin Mims, or was this a one-off?
Well, I have to ask, were we wrong about Marvin Mims coming into the year? Because we looked back at 2021 and probably even 2020 and said, well, he was just misused. He wasn't really a focal part of the game plan. But this year, I think he's been getting a healthy dose of targets. He's clearly the number one guy, but he's definitely up and down. And he is on track statistically to have his best year. He's got 558 yards right now. 705 is the high for him that he got last year. Only 3 touchdowns this year, but it's just like, man, some games he's there and some games he's not. And I'm starting to wonder if that was maybe more of a him thing and not necessarily a Lincoln Riley thing.
I feel like Marvin's a guy who probably does a good job of getting open and getting in space. And if he's open, obviously he's going to make quite a few catches. He doesn't seem like a guy who can go up and make a contested catch consistently. And I think that is a glaring weakness in his game. And so I think as we start looking forward to next season, are we convinced he's not here? I'm not.
I am. He's gone.
Really?
In my opinion. Yeah, I think so.
Somewhere else or to the draft?
I think he goes to the draft.
But I think what is he at best? Like a 3rd or 4th round pick, probably?
I think at best.
Probably, yeah. A day, maybe late day 2, probably day 3 type of guy. But I mean, at this point,
he's not going to wow with the measurables. Like he's not going to be a draft day or a combine guy that rises on the boards because
he's going to have to put it on film, and that's one thing I think is lacking.
I'm not pressing the panic button on him whatsoever. I mean, I think it was kind of a one-off. Honestly, I think it kind of seems sometimes like he's pressing at times, like he has such an urge. He wants to be able to make the big play. I mean, Adam, I think you sent me a Snapchat of it, right there at the very beginning. He catches that ball in the first play. He scores. I think he runs away from the Iowa State defense, and Oklahoma's up 7-0 after the first play.
That one doesn't count anyway.
That's true, but
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that, as poor as Marvin Mims played on Saturday, I think the one good thing that you can take away from that on the flip side is you got a good performance out of Jalil Farouk with 4 catches for 74 yards and a touchdown, making a couple of highly contested catches on the Iowa State sideline. That was good to see. And then you got to see, Drake Stoops continue to get involved. Braden Willis had a couple of catches that kept the drive moving. Zach Schmidt, 1 catch, 2 yards, 1 touchdown. That's a pretty good touchdown to catch ratio. But yeah, I thought it was good to see. I would expect Marvin Mims this weekend to bounce back in a big way as the Sooners return home to take on Baylor.
Let's hope so, because you're going to need all the firepower you can. In this game, you didn't necessarily need it. You could get away with Marvin Mims having 3-4 drops, whatever it was. I think he had probably 2 touchdowns that he dropped, even with that holding call, probably bringing one of them back. But yeah, you just can't rely on, or you can't have that happen against teams that are going to get tougher on the schedule.
Yeah. We'll stay here. One final thing on the offense before we flip over to the Ted Roof side of the ball. But I think on Saturday, guys, it was really good to see this Oklahoma offensive line continue to build upon the performance that we saw from Kansas before the bye week, against this Iowa State defense that ranked number 1 in the Big 12 in total defense and, top 15 nationally. Iowa State was allowing just 105 yards per game on the ground, and Oklahoma was able to rack up 186 of them, led by Eric Gray, who, guys, Eric Gray's putting together a pretty solid year. That was his 5th 100-yard game of the season. So we said going up to Ames that Would Oklahoma be able to run the football against this rush 3 drop A defense that has kind of plagued this OU offense over the last 3 to 4 seasons? So I think that if you're Jeff Levy and you're Dylan Gabriel and you're all 5 members of that offensive line, knowing who's coming to Norman this weekend, led by that 6'4", 360-pound nose tackle that Baylor's got in Siaki Ike, Oklahoma should feel confident this weekend that they can run the football, and they're going to have to do so to take on the Bears.
I think for as excited and maybe surprised is a good word for how Eric Gray's been over the last few weeks. Maybe equally as disappointing in the rest of that running back room. I get Javante Barnes wasn't in Ames, but Marcus Major, no real spark. Can't seem to run the ball without Eric Gray, guys. If this is a one horse machine, I do worry about Baylor because I do think that's their defense is still pretty solid. So yeah, I worry. Hopefully Javante Barnes is back, but you would like to see more from Marcus Major. Maybe he's not fully healthy. Maybe that's the answer. But I mean, this team could not run the ball without Eric Gray out there on last Saturday.
And he was in that injury tent for a really long time. I was sitting there watching it the entire time, like thinking, man, he's in there forever. And the offense stalled when he wasn't out on the field. So between Marvin Mims dropping a couple passes, this game probably should have been more like a 38-13 type of a win that you felt really, really good about. Maybe even worse than that if the defense gets a couple fourth down stops. But it wasn't the case. And so you're not going to get away with those types of performances against Baylor. You have to be on your A game. Marcus Major, you have to have Javante Barnes healthy, in my opinion. But Major hasn't looked like the same guy since the competition level has stepped up. No pun intended, in a major way. But he's just not effective in that second string right now.
I know that the stat sheet doesn't wow you when you look at Dylan Gabriel's numbers over the weekend, 15 of 26 for 148 yards and 1 touchdown. I mean, he did have 3 drops from Marvin Mims on Saturday, so that's going to affect the completion percentage. But overall, did you guys feel like Dylan played pretty well against this John Heacock Iowa State defense? I mean, doing just enough, for Oklahoma, to win. But, Dylan Gabriel's job got made a whole lot easier with Oklahoma being able to successfully and consistently run the football.
I think the past 2 games we've seen a considerable improvement in Dylan Gabriel's game, even though the numbers didn't show it last Saturday. You know what you're not seeing? Crazy overthrows, especially to guys that are wide open. I think it was to Jalil's a big third down. I want to say third or fourth quarter on a little out route. And we've seen that multiple times this year where he's overthrown that or the pass has been behind and it was right on the money. And it was almost like a breath of fresh air because that's what we've been clamoring for. Dylan hasn't been bad all year long, but he's missed some really key throws. And he did make key throws for the most part last Saturday. So yeah, I think you're spot on, Tyler. The numbers aren't going to wow you, but I do think, he's making the throws that you would expect a high caliber quarterback in a Power 5 team would make.
Yeah, and I think he was deliberate with the ball too. We saw in past years, whether it be Radler or Caleb Williams or whoever, just kind of sitting back there. Even if the protection was really good, they just sit there and sit there and sit there, and they can't find the guy that's open. Gabriel wasn't really doing that. He was finding his guy. He knew where he was going with the ball. The offense moved, more effectively, in my opinion. It may not have been for 20-yard chunks. It may have been 3-4 yards at a time, even in the passing game, but it just felt like more in rhythm throughout the entire game.
Mm-hmm. Adam, talk to me a little bit about, with obviously you being in the stadium at the game, talk to me a little bit about the Oklahoma defensive performance, because in my opinion, I thought that this was probably Ted Roof's group's best overall performance since the Nebraska game. 3 interceptions. Let's be realistic, it was probably only 2, but Woody will give you 3. I can't believe they didn't enter.
I don't know how that was.
How did they review that, Adam? Because they didn't show it on TV.
Yeah, I was watching the guy on the sideline, the replay guy, and he was standing over there, and I was like, they're going to come back from commercial break, and then they're going to go review it. And I was like, that's typical make it slow type of production. But no, nothing happened. And I was like, you guys were texting me the whole time. I couldn't see it on the video board. I was so confused by that. But yeah, the defense in general, I'm not buying it still. I think their running plays were so slow to develop. Just watching that in person, real time. I was kind of low on the one end in the visitors section there. And I'm just watching it going, man, that handoff to the running back, him getting to the line of scrimmage, it was so slow, the way that developed. And I think it helped out this defense a lot. So I still can't buy this defense right now.
I'm a little bit kind of in the middle because on one hand, I took the over in this game because I was such a non-believer in this defense. I was like, I've seen this story before. Iowa State, not a good offense, and they go up and they put up 40. I've seen it before. I know this is going to happen, and it didn't. And so I think on that front, and you need to be pleased with the defensive performance because I think they did what they were supposed to do last weekend. Outside of, I think, probably one or two plays. I know the Danny Stutzman touchdown given up, that was just atrocious. But he did make up for it. I think a drive or two later with the interception. So I think there's still more to be desired from, but that Iowa State offense is so bad. I don't think you can confidently feel like this defense has made strides forward. To an extent. Now, I will say, I think Deshaun White's coming on. I think he's really started to cement himself as an impact player. But for the rest of the defense, I mean, Key Lawrence, stock down, to be honest. I'm trying to think who else is out there that had made any plays. Justin Burrows, maybe stock up, eat it, Tyler. So but I think some of the key contributors that we thought were going to step up and make significant strides this year haven't really been there.
I think that this was the perfect opponent at the perfect time for this Oklahoma defense. I think that, especially from a confidence standpoint, we knew coming out of the Kansas game that this defense played pretty well in spurts, but they weren't able to put a four-quarter game together of good defense. And I think that in this matchup, obviously Iowa State is very limited on what they're able to do offensively because of the quarterback position, because of the lack of talent out on the perimeter outside of Xavier Hutchinson. But I think that it was really good to see because Oklahoma did exactly what they were supposed to do in this one. They were able to stop the running game, hold Iowa State under 70 total yards rushing. They were able to create turnovers, which is something that you're going to have to be able to do on the back end of this schedule. But to me, guys, the Iowa State rushing attack that we saw on Saturday is by far worse than anything that Oklahoma is going to see over the next 4 games to close out the regular season. So. Yeah. But again, even though the competition is going to get better, and it starts with Baylor on Saturday, and we can talk about them here in just a second, but I think that in terms of what Oklahoma's been able to do in the front seven, particularly over the last couple of games, that's got to give this group a lot of confidence going into the last 4 games of this regular season.
It was encouraging to see them do what they should have done to a bad offense. I mean, even with the bad defenses that we've had, normally we haven't always necessarily seen that. Hunter Decker's, he's just not the guy. Like, there were so many incompletions on short passes that should have been completed, that should have been easy completions. He just wasn't able to hit those. So the defense did get lucky. I would have liked to have seen a lot more sacks because I don't think he was super mobile inside the pocket. Once he got out there, he had some speed, but yeah, there were so many times where it's like, man, you got to finish that play. You have to finish that rush and take down a guy that's not super, super nimble in the pocket. So would like to see that definitely improve. And I just can't buy it, though. It felt like Iowa State made it almost too easy for this defense. But at the same time, I think a big challenge for this team, and we saw it happen in that TCU game, is once they get mentally beat, it really snowballs on them. And it was several weeks of that. And so now you've got, a game against Kansas that, despite giving up a ton of points, felt a little bit better. Now you've got a game against Iowa State where I think you held them to their third lowest, I guess fourth lowest. I'm looking at their schedule right now. They haven't scored very many points, but you held them to what you should have probably. So you start feeling really good about that. Can that mental edge kind of come back so we can see them really attack like they did in those first 3 games of the season against Baylor?
I think one of my favorite parts about this podcast that we do is, I mean, we keep it real. We call it how we see it 99% of the time. But I think that maybe it's been unfair criticism, but I know that I've been particularly hard on what we've seen from the Oklahoma defense, through the first 9 weeks of the season. But, guys, outside of the 28-yard Hunter Decker scramble, and then, of course, giving up the 4th and 10, 4th and 11 conversions on the same drive, I liked what I saw from this Oklahoma defense on Saturday. So there is one thing, though, and I know that you guys will agree with me on this. Through 5 Big 12 games, this Oklahoma defense has only gotten 3 sacks. So I don't care who you're playing. That is unacceptable at a place like Oklahoma with the talent that we have, even though it's not as talented as what we would expect at a place like Oklahoma. With the guys that are in that room and with the defensive mind that we've got leading this group, 3 sacks in 5 Big 12 games, that is absolutely unacceptable. and we'll see if we can get things a little bit better this weekend going up against Blake Shapen.
I'm curious to your guys' thoughts on this. I feel like this game on Saturday is two teams with a very um, similar season so far, right? Like, I think OU got off to a hot start. I think Baylor did to an extent. Obviously, got tough loss up in Provo against BYU, kind of regained their footing. Then you lose to Oklahoma State, kind of handled in that game. Lose to West Virginia on the road. Now you've bounced back with a couple wins. Does that sound familiar? Because to me, it sounds pretty familiar with kind of what this team has been in Norman so far. So this is kind of a crossroads of two teams with at this point, probably a similar trajectory of where their potential season could end up. And this is the crossroads of who actually meets that and who continues to kind of fall back to the pack. So I think this is a pretty big game just for the remainder of the season for both of these squads. Am I wrong in thinking there's a lot of overlap here?
No, I agree with you. And I was kind of looking at Baylor's schedule so far.
Yeah.
They've played Iowa State, they've played Oklahoma State, West Virginia, Kansas, and Texas Tech in conference. That's probably the softest conference schedule for any team so far. Oklahoma State really the only test there. They lost to them at home. They lost to West Virginia on the road. Morgantown's tough. They played, I think, the second half of that game with their backup quarterback. So, it happens. But is OU the best team that they will have faced out of everyone's, or the second best after Oklahoma State?
I mean, did you watch
BYU?
I think
BYU lost to Liberty.
Yeah, I think Oklahoma State and BYU today are a lot different than when Baylor played them. I don't think either team is as good. Clearly not Oklahoma State. They've got a ton of injuries. They're not okay. Spencer Sanders didn't even finish the game last week. I don't know if that's a significant injury or not. I don't think it is. But both of those schools are drastically different today than what they are. So I would put OU as like the third best team, but you catch West Virginia at home when their offense is humming. I don't know. I mean, you could say West Virginia is better than OU. So,
who's the best team in the Big 12 right now?
TCU.
It's easy, TCU. Yeah. K-State had a great game, but you have to remember what they did before that. And the fact that they're probably going to go back to Adrian Martinez, who may have a lower ceiling than Will Howard, which is weird to say considering how bad he was in years past.
And they're an underdog at home against Texas.
Explain that to me, please.
I don't know.
Outside of Texas coming off of a bye, there's no possible explanation, in my opinion, how that could justify them being a 2.5-point favorite on the road to Manhattan.
Vegas knows something.
Yeah,
I know.
Anytime a line is that obviously weird, Vegas thinks Texas is going to win.
Yeah. Number 24, Texas.
Number 24, Texas is a
Well, guys, let's dive into Baylor here. The Baylor Bears 5-3 on the year, 3-2 in Big 12 play with losses to Oklahoma State and West Virginia. We all remember that crazy Thursday night game that they had up in Morgantown. Tough loss for the Bears, but after that 2-game skid, they've rebounded to win their last two impressively against Kansas and on the road against Texas Tech. So, guys, we say it week in and week out for this conference this year, but Oklahoma's going to have their hands full at 2:00 on Saturday. This is a very good, very disciplined, tough, well-coached football team that Dave Aranda is bringing to Norman on Saturday. And guys, let's we want to start when OU has the football or when Baylor does, because this is going to be a tough one for Oklahoma to take care of on Saturday. I do not feel good about this at all.
Let's choose optimism and go with when OU has the ball here.
There is no optimism.
Okay, when Oklahoma has the football, let's talk about the Baylor defense here just a little bit. Baylor defense in the Big 12 this year, not quite like what we've seen statistically or as dominant from a Dave Aranda coach defense. They are giving up over 28 points a game. But guys, when Baylor has played Oklahoma each of the last 2 years with Dave Aranda as the defensive mind and the head coach, Baylor's defense has held Oklahoma to under 20 points and under 300 total yards in each of the last two matchups. So for me in this game, for Oklahoma to have success moving the football, for them to be able to put up points, I mean, it's as simple as it is each and every week in college football. You got to be able to run the football. Mm-hmm. And for me, the biggest matchup in this game, which is kind of going to be strength on strength, is going to be Oklahoma's offensive line going against Baylor's defensive line. Now, Baylor is going to do a lot of things, very multiple in their looks on the defensive side of the football, but there's one thing that really concerns me, as well as Oklahoma's offensive line has played each of the last two games. It's how is Oklahoma going to defend? How are they going to block those three guys up front? It starts with the nose guard, 6'4", 358-pounder, number 62, Siaki Ika. Andrew Rahm has had problems with this guy each of the last 2 years. We'll be able to see if he's able to take a step forward this weekend and hold up on the interior. And then, guys, Wanye Morris and Anton Harrison, I think that this matchup outside of Texas, I think that this is probably going to be the most athletic set of defensive ends that Oklahoma has faced up to this point in the season. 6'5", 6'6", one guy. TJ Franklin's weighing in at 265 pounds. Number 95, Gabe Hall on the other side, 6'6", 296, pretty quick off of the edge. So if Oklahoma is going to have any chance to win this game on Saturday, they've got to be able to run the football, particularly outside running. And guys, I just don't know. I really don't know if Oklahoma is going to be able to do that, if they're going to be able to out-physical Baylor at the point of attack on Saturday. That's the matchup for me.
Yeah, I mean, this Baylor team hasn't given up over 170 yards of rushing all year, I believe. I'm quickly taking a look at the stats, including, I think, 3 or 4 games where they've held opponents under 100 yards rushing, which is fine for the Albanese and the Texas States. But when you're doing that to, I believe, Kansas, and let me see, was it BYU was the other one I saw? BYU, 83 yards.
Yeah.
It's going to be a huge challenge. And so I think to counter your point, Tyler, my gut says this team won't be able to run the ball overly successful. So can Dylan Gabriel go win a game with his arm? Can he do that? We've yet to see it this year where he has gone out and simply won a game with his arm, in my opinion, where it hasn't been more of a balanced offense. That's going to be the big question for me, because I don't think running the ball consistently is going to be available. So can he go win it with his arm? We're about to find out.
To play the flip side of that, Kansas came into town with the number 1 ranked rush defense in the Big 12, and OU ran all over them. So
True. Yeah.
Maybe Kansas wasn't really that good, but it still happened. So I think OU will have some success. I would really feel a lot better if we knew Javonte Barnes was going to be healthy for this matchup, because then you do have a legitimate 1-2 punch there, and you can start wearing down that defense over time. If you just have Eric Gray and Marcus Major, I lose a lot of confidence there. So I hope that Jeff Lebby, he got a little bit predictable, I think, in that Iowa State game, especially in the third, middle of the third into the middle of the fourth quarter, where it became essentially pass on first down, incomplete, run on second down, pick up 2 yards. And then all of a sudden you're in third long. And OU really needs to stay out of third and long in this game, I think, to be able to stay on the field. That's going to be super important. And one thing that I think helped a ton against Iowa State was the offense was staying on the field. They ran with some pace, but they were also pretty close in time of possession. They were still under what Iowa State had, but that's been a challenge for this offense all year in regards to helping out their defense. And I think that's going to be key.
I think another thing that's going to be important for Oklahoma in terms of them trying to run the football on Saturday, of course, like I mentioned, the 3 down linemen that Baylor's going to trot out there. But for me, as good as Eric Gray has been this year, and, Javonte Barnes, he's flashed at times, but I think for Oklahoma to be successful in the running game on Saturday, you've got to figure out a way to get 1, if not 2 of your offensive linemen up into the second level, because for me, I know that, Oklahoma fans should be very familiar. He's a guy that's been on campus in Waco for a long, long time. That's their 5th-year senior linebacker, number 5, Dylan Doyle, fantastic player. Oklahoma fans will want to pay attention to number 5 on Saturday. He's complimented next to him by number 2, Matt Jones. But, as good as Eric Gray has been, he's still not a guy that I would trust to run in between the tackles, 10, 15, 20 times a game. So Oklahoma's going to have to be able to get their linemen up into the second level, make things a little bit easier for them, so that it forces Baylor's safeties to be in a one-on-one situation where they've got to make a tackle against Oklahoma running backs out in space. But this is going to be a big test for Oklahoma. And, Marvin Mims dropped 3 balls, one of which was going to go for a touchdown last week against this Dave Aranda defense. You can't afford to have multiple drops. You've got to cash in on the big plays down the field. You've got to be able to haul in 1 or 2 of those deep balls that Dylan Gabriel has thrown extremely well each of the last couple of weeks. So it's going to be a big test for OU when they're on offense on Saturday.
Definitely.
Let's transition, Tyler. What are you looking at on the defensive side of the ball come Saturday?
This side of the ball scares me even more in the matchup against Baylor. Baylor's offense has been impressive, guys, all year long, led by second-year offensive coordinator Jeff Grimes. In conference play so far this season, the Bears are averaging just over 35 points per game, 457 total yards of offense, around 180 to 105 rushing yards per game. And guys, one scenario that's going to be extremely critical for this Oklahoma defense on Saturday is forcing Baylor to get off the field on third downs. Baylor right now ranks third in the Big 12, converting at about 46% on third downs. If Baylor is even remotely close to 46% or above on Saturday, OU has no chance to win this game unless they just force a handful of turnovers. So when Baylor's got the football, everybody likes to talk about a team's quarterback, and rightfully so. Blake Shapen, 67% completion on the year, roughly 255 yards per game, 9 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Not bad. But guys, the big storyline going into this matchup for Oklahoma is, how does the Oklahoma front seven handle that veteran Baylor offensive line and running back Richard Reese, who's kind of been an unsung hero in terms of the I guess the playmakers in the Big 12. We all talk about Deuce Vaughn. We all talk about Bijan Robinson. But statistically, this true freshman that Baylor's got running the rock right now, 5'9", 175 pounds. He's third in the Big 12 in rushing yards, over 110 a game, 12 touchdowns. Not the biggest guy in the world by any means is Richard Reese, but he runs big, really comes downhill, runs behind his pads, and he's comfortable carrying the workload for this Baylor offense. I think he had 31 carries 2 weeks ago against Kansas. So they're not afraid to hand the ball to this freshman for him to carry the workload against Baylor. For Baylor. I'm sorry.
Yeah, this scares me a lot. I know there's been some talk about Blake Shapen being maybe a little bit more erratic than some people would like, but he's, in my opinion, from what I've watched, he's a clear upgrade over Gary Bohannon. He has 5 interceptions on the year, so I wouldn't necessarily consider him turnover prone. This defense in OU has gotten their hands on some lately. They finally are starting to turn their heads. So maybe that could be the difference in the game if they're able to create some turnovers there. But how much is he actually going to have to throw the football? Because I think if Grimes has his way, he's just going to lean on Richard Reese the whole game. And I don't have a ton of faith in this OU defense that we know is soft right in the middle to be able to slow him down.
I kind of feel the same way that I mentioned about OU's offense as I do Baylor's, because you're right. 31 carries against Kansas, 36 carries against Texas Tech, 2 big games by this freshman running back. If you're OU, that has to be priority number 1. So if you come into the game thinking lean, heavy into the box, do you trust Shapen's arm to go win the game? And so this may come down to maybe not which quarterback has the best overall game, but which quarterback can make the key throws throughout the game that really do make a difference. And I have no freaking clue which one's going to be able to make those throws, because both quarterbacks, while they've had good games, have had moments that really do scratch your head. We'll figure it out on Saturday.
Jeff Grimes does a really good job of easing Blake Shapen kind of into the flow of the game, using a lot of different formations, motions, plays. Baylor's very multiple in what they try to do. A lot of outside run, zone schemes, screen passes. They'll even throw some screen passes to the tight end in certain situations, slants across the middle, and then, of course, deep balls to Hal Presley. But here's your length and girth report for the podcast, guys. But one of the things that, to me, is why I'm picking Baylor to win this game, and obviously we'll get into score predictions here in a minute. It's because Oklahoma's defensive line over the course of Big 12 play, like I mentioned, 3 sacks in 5 games. You go down the list of who Baylor's going to be trotting out there, the big boys up front, veteran offensive line. Just guys, listen to this: 6'7", 6'5", 6'2", 6'4", 6'5", 302, 331, 300, 312, 314. Big boys, a lot of beef up front. You've got a 5th-year senior, 2 6-year seniors, a sophomore. Oh, and by the way, the captain up front leading the offensive charge, Jacob Gall, 6-year senior, played a lot of football for Baylor. So Oklahoma has not been able against elite competition to hold up in run protection, to get after the quarterback. Oklahoma is going to have to play their best game of the season in the front 7. And guys, my last little thing on this: what's been the biggest kryptonite to Oklahoma's linebackers so far this year, particularly Danny Stutzman and David Agwebu? It's been motion. It's been misdirection that's forced them to hesitate and not react to the football. So Baylor is going to do a lot of things pre-snap. They're going to do a lot of misdirection. You're going to see a lot of You're going to see a lot of guard tackle pulls. It's going to be pivotal for Oklahoma to contain the edge and for their guys to be able to get off blocks. That way it frees up 28-2 to be able to come downhill and make plays.
Before we move on to bets, I think it is worth mentioning the game being on ESPN Plus, 2 p.m. kickoff time, which because it's on ESPN Plus, that means OU set the game time. That's the game time that they preferred, which is a pretty awesome time for fans. I, unfortunately, will be in a wedding that starts at 3 o'clock that day. Am I allowed to object to the wedding to like stall it out to watch the game? Like, what is my game plan here?
You're in the wedding?
I'm a groomsman.
Okay. Bluetooth earpiece, right ear. That way the crowd can't see you. That's the way to go. And what was this, the bride or the groom that decided to schedule this weekend on a Saturday in the fall?
It's got to be the bride. It's in Virginia, so they clearly don't live in football culture there.
Well, we'll see. My sympathies for you, though.
My wedding's on a Sunday. There's a reason.
Smart man.
Yep.
Smart man.
I don't know what to tell you, man.
I don't have a problem with it.
You're in the wedding.
Well, I mean, if you're a fan that's griping about the game being on ESPN Plus, go to the game.
That doesn't bother me that much, other than the fact that like
it's $5 a month.
Yeah, like I already have it. It doesn't bother me that much, other than just the fact that like it's lower exposure. But this is a year where I kind of don't mind. So
not as low as exposure as Pac-12. So we still have that.
I actually was in a hotel Saturday night that had Pac-12 network, which was
nice.
Pretty awesome. That was pretty awesome.
I was thinking on Saturday, who has the Pac-12 network? Because I've had Sling, it didn't have it, and now I have YouTube TV and it doesn't have it. Who has it?
I just like points in Kansas City has it. That's who has it.
Well, you have to start booking some hotel reservations,
guys. Before we move on to bets here, Oklahoma is sitting at 5-3 on the year, 3-2, or excuse me, 2-3 in conference play right now. Baylor at West Virginia, Oklahoma State at Texas Tech. I know last week I predicted them to go 3-2 over the last 5, and I think you guys did the same. Mm-hmm. You still feel good about Oklahoma going 3-1 these next 2-2?
Seeing Oklahoma State do what they did at Kansas State, and the fact that we don't know what Spencer Sanders' health status is going to be when he comes to Norman in a few weeks, that makes me feel a little bit better about them finishing out the year 4-1. But I'm still not super confident.
Just because Oklahoma State looks weaker doesn't mean this team can't lose in Morgantown or in Lubbock. Yeah. So I still think it's safe to say, obviously 1-0 heading in from last week. I still think it's safe to assume 2-2 the rest of the way. They could very much lose to Baylor. They could very much lose to West Virginia. They definitely could lose to Oklahoma State, and they could lose to Tech. And so anything is possible. I think they win 2 of them, and that I feel confident in that. I do think Oklahoma State is the swing game between 3-2 and 4-1 down the stretch.
Yeah. I will say this though, they did exactly what they needed to coming out of that Texas game. Beat Kansas, beat Iowa State. They may end up being the 2 worst teams in the Big 12, but you had to have that because now you just need one win to get to a bowl game, and that's the most important thing at this point, in my opinion. Get those extra practices and have a chance to play an extra game for more development.
And we're not far off from a certain bowl game scenario that I don't know if OU fans would love or hate.
Do you want it?
No, I don't want it. Because there's no way that we can slow down Caleb Williams.
But I don't know if they can slow down us.